And a very good evening to you, those of you who are in Guyana, in the Caribbean, in North America. Good evening. And good night, good morning to those of you further afield in Europe, United Kingdom, France. Welcome. Good evening to those of you who are in Jamaica. In Jamaica, of course, it's an hour behind the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean. So it's 6 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock in Jamaica. Of course, it's 6 o'clock in the North America, in the United States too, that time of year. And good evening to those of you joining us from Arizona and California out there out on the West Coast. I often forget that we have Arizonians and Californians who join us. Some Texans also join us. Good evening to you. Good evening to the people down south, particularly in South Carolina and Georgia, Atlanta area. Welcome to Politics 101. I want to thank all of you for continuing to support our program as we engage in struggle. There are some people I would like to especially thank. Want to thank those of you who have continued to support us, who continue to support us. I'd like to thank Cheryl. I'd like to thank Sean, Roxanne, my sister Lynette. I'd like to thank Lynette and those of you who have answered the call. Of course, it's our year-end fundraiser, and quite a few of you have responded to the call, and I would like to thank you all so much for continuing to support us. I would like to, as I said, thank Lynette, thank Patricia, Delny. I would like to thank you. I would like to thank Sean, Cheryl, Roxanne, Uraya. I would like to thank you. Of course, to thank Novella and to thank Desiree. Thanks for answering the call for support. We are eternally grateful. We're eternally grateful to all of you. There are a couple of other people we have to thank. I'm going to get to that. But welcome to Politics 101. Welcome to Politics 101. This evening we're going to be talking about the 6.5% IPAS, 6.5% that this government has been very anti anti-public servants. There's no complaint. There's no complaints. They can't make any complaint now that they don't have money, because they do have money, and they've been doing all kinds of things with that money, and they've not been given the public servants. Gregory D, I want to thank you for your donation, your contribution to Politics 101. Gregory D is a longtime supporter, and thank you so much for continuing to support us. Welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link. And let everyone know that we're on. We're going to be joined by Elson Low. To talk about that offer. Well, it's not an offer. It's more than enough. It's a done deal. And that's what they're giving the public servants, 6.5%. 6.5% of little or nothing, because public servants really work for little or nothing. It's a shame when we think about what the Guyanese public servants work for, compared with our brothers and sisters in the English-speaking Caribbean. We literally work for peanuts, less than peanuts. And one asks oneself, how do Guyanese make it? There's a story in the newspapers today. I think it's in the Kaitro News. There's that story in the Kaitro News that 549 million US dollars have gone into Guyana from overseas remittances. You all hear that? $549 million in remittances into Guyana, one of the highest in the world. And I think it amounts to almost 4% of our GDP. That's stunning, and it has been so over the last couple of years. So although we now have oil, we still, the World Bank report, as Guyana increases oil production yearly, citizens depend more on overseas remittances. Amidst ramped up oil production and being labeled the fastest growing economy in the world, Guyanese still heavily depend on overseas relatives to send them help to survive. For this year, the World Bank said that Guyana received 549 million US dollars in remittances. That is financial aid from overseas relatives, representing some 3.4% of the country's gross domestic product. You all hear those figures? $549 million for this year. That's stunning. That's stunning. No wonder. Guyanese are saying that the oil money, is it's not trickling down to them. it's not trickling down to them. You know, it was $380 million in 2019, $429 million. All this is US money in 2020. And then 548 million in 2021 and 2022. And for 2023, it's $549 million. Let me read those figures again for you all. The World Bank report says the remittances to Guyana was represented $380 million in 2019. That's when we started to pump the oil. Then it moved to $429 million in 2020. Then 548 million in 2021 and 2022. And now in 2023, $549 million. That's money that is coming from overseas. Now, there are a couple of things there, because I think some Guyanese at home make themselves the fool. Some of our own people who normally talk about overseas people and all that kind of stuff. You all hear the kind of money that goes into Guyana from overseas relatives? $549 million this year, $548 million last year. You know, so those Guyanese at home who sometimes play the fool and chat nonsense, they have to understand that the role that all of us are playing in keeping our country afloat, including people in the diaspora. And I hear that crazy talk. You know, I hope that we stop that talk. But with all the oil money, our people are still depending on remittances. Well, if you're giving them 6.5% of $80,000, then you understand why they have to depend on relatives overseas. It's real dread in our country. It's real dread. And when you take into consideration prices, the price items have gone up. Clearly, those who earn enough are able to keep up with the prices. But public servants find it very difficult to keep up with prices on the market. And of course, the market determines the prices. The government has little control over the market because, you know, it's an open market. And the government has little control over the market, but what the government does have is control over wages for public servants. Good evening, welcome to all of you. Mr. Thomas Robertson from down there in Georgia. Welcome to you, Shemlin, Susan, London, Kirk H. Welcome to Politics 101. We're talking wages. So the government doesn't have control over the prices. In many regards, I know there are economists in the audience. I am not an economist, but I would venture to say that the government doesn't have much control over prices in the market. Those prices are determined by the people who sell. But what the government does have control over is how to help people to keep up with the prices. We all know the story. A dollar today could buy a certain amount of goods and services. And then when the prices go up for those goods and services, the dollar doesn't have the same value. So a dollar yesterday and a dollar today, it's it's worth not the same. And we know the prices. We know the prices. But the wages have not been keeping up with the prices. And the government has been going around giving handouts to people. And we know it's been giving handouts to certain categories of workers. And it has been starving other categories of workers. The government has not been sitting down with the unions and coming up with a wage package. What the government is supposed to do is to sit down with the unions, hear what the unions are saying. The government, of course, has to consult its own economists, hear what they're saying, and then you come to a livable wage. How can you be talking about the fastest growing economy in the world and your people are not earning a livable wage? They're not earning a livable wage. It's a shame. It's a shame. You know, another story that caught my attention is this chap Nandlal, who appeared to have been threatening commentators to say that commentators should be careful about how they criticize the government on the oil and on Exxon, because Maduro and the Venezuelans are using that. Apparently Maduro turned up at a meeting with a set of newspaper clippings with people who are critical of ExxonMobil and critical of the way the government has been treating with ExxonMobil. And Nandlal then decided, in what was more than a veiled threat, telling people that they mustn't criticize Exxon and they mustn't criticize the government because Maduro using it. And so the typical thing is try to roll back free speech. And then he was forced to walk it back after some commentators. I noticed Chris Ram in today's papers took him on. Stabrook News did a very good editorial on it. It's not our business if Maduro wants to use our internal situation to bolster his argument. Well, it's our business, but our free speech should not be dependent on that. The government should fix things. If the government governs properly, then we won't have to criticize the government. A good evening to you all and welcome. Welcome. So those are a couple of things that we want to talk to Elson about, you know, the 6.5% to the public servants. We're going to try to get his views on Nandlal's nonsense. And then, of course, that report in today's papers of remittances, 549%. $549 million in remittances in an economy that has tremendous growth. So we've seen a lot of contradictions in our society. You all know where we stand on this program. We are not denying that Guyana is flushed with money. Yes, the contract is not a perfect contract, the oil contract. Yes, Exxon is getting away with a lot of murder. But yes, we are getting more money today than we ever had before. We must not deny that. We beat our case when we try to deny that. And the government is spending money, spending a lot of money on infrastructure. We can't deny that. They may be siphoning off a lot, but they're spending money. And there's some visible changes in Guyana. But is the government managing properly? The areas in which the government is spending money, are those the right areas? You see, that's where we have to hit the government. We can't deny that things are, there's no way the GDP in a country can rise at the rate at which Guyana's GDP has risen, and you don't see some changes in the country. It's impossible. Some of these changes are in spite of the government. Some of these changes could be much more pronounced if the government was a better government. And that's where we have to hit them. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. As I said, Elson Low is here with us, one of the young voices that has been coming through the last 3 years. We've been up against it, those of us who are opposition supporters, because regime change, electoral coup, saw the opposition, which was in government, being sidelined, bad governance. We're not part of decision making in the country. But in struggle, there are positive things. And one of the good things is some young people are coming through. They're developing their skills, their analytical capacities. They're developing them in the heat of the struggle. So, as with all struggles, there are the downsides, but there are also the upsides. I think Elson is ready for us. Let me bring him in.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. Always happy to come on for yet another show.
Thank you very much. And it's the festive season, but as you know, you're getting to know in politics, there is really no holiday, especially in a place like Guyana. So we're going to be working through the festive season. I want to talk to you about a couple of things, Elson, and let's go straight
to
the issue of the wage offer, but it's not an offer.
Yeah,
it's a deal. The wage increase, if we can call it that. That's 6.5% by the government. Many people have decried it. That when you look at what public servants are working for, then you look at 6.5%. Please tell us, is 6.5% an advance for workers, taking everything into consideration, prices, inflation rate, etc., etc.? Is 6.5% doing anything for public servants?
Well, the first thing that I think we should get a sense of as we discuss this topic is 6.5% actual an increase? Now, Guyana is looking at 6.6% inflation, according to the U.S. State Department, which means that a 6.5% increase, which is below the rate of inflation, is not actually an increase in the real wages of workers, but a decrease in the real wages of workers. So it is not that there has been any increase in public servant salaries when you account for inflation. So therefore, as the prices continue to go up, we are now seeing public servants, their income, their disposable income, what they can actually buy, that contract. They can buy less goods and services and pay for less services than they could have last year, because we've seen prices increase and their salaries have not increased to match that. We've also heard public servants complain about the fact that they're concerned that they're taxing this 6.5%, which of course will carry it even further down. below that inflation rate, and which effectively reverses some of the minimal gains that have been made in previous years in terms of an increase in salaries. And when I say minimal, I mean 1% over inflation and that kind of ridiculousness. So it is not an increase, it is a decrease in the salaries of public servants. That's what we're facing here today, which is again deeply tragic. Public servants are vital to the function of Guyana's government. We are now in an oil environment in which there's going to be quite a lot that has to be done to keep things going. Even simple things like ensuring security, like ensuring our healthcare is provided, like ensuring that our schools continue to function. All of these things, as our economy changes, are even more vital. But public servants are being paid less by this measure than they were last year. Now, that is in terms of the real numbers. Let's look at the macro picture. This is yet another year in which Guyana is going to be the country with the fastest growth in the world. The fastest growth in the world. And I say yet another year because really, when we think about it, there's been more than 1 year that Guyana has had the fastest growth rate in the entire world in the past few years. And if we're not the fastest, we're the second fastest or third fastest. Now, we're also seeing Guyana's production per day reach over 600,000 barrels of oil per day, which is more than twice the peak production in Trinidad during their absolute boom times. We've seen an estimate of revenue for this year. Of course, we're not quite at the end of the year, but is almost or around about 1.6 billion barrels of oil. 1.6 billion US of revenue, which is 320 billion Guyana dollars of revenue. Now, that is, when you consider that our entire government budget only a few years ago was around about $300 billion. That's quite a substantial 1 year amount of revenue to be receiving. And it gives you a sense that there's significant funds available. Now, that's the macro picture. On a government budget level, you mentioned that they're spending, and indeed they are spending. Just to help your viewers really recognize, and we'll go into some of the way the PPP is thinking and talking about public servants, which is problematic and explains why public servants can't get any kind of proper increase. But this year the PPP is spending about $905 billion. That's really, when you add the supplementals to the national budget, 900 or so billion dollars is being spent by the PPP. Now, that 7.5 billion public servant salary increase to 6.5%, which is 7.5 billion. That's not even 1% of that national budget. Not even 1%. And in fact, it's not even certainly it's only a few percent of the 320 billion that we were talking about. As the oil revenues. So essentially, there's a huge amount of money being spent. The national budget has tripled from only a few years ago. But public servant pay is actually decreased this year, which is troubling. When you look at it in terms of inflation. That says to me that the government is making a deliberate effort over and beyond just the regular running of a country. They're making a deliberate effort not to pay public servants. They're deliberately channeling funds away from public servants towards, as we like to say in the opposition, friends, family, and favorites, their elite, which is truly tragic for public servants, but for Ghana more broadly. Now, that is sort of, in terms of the numbers, what's going on. But one of the ways that is important for us to look at this is we must consider that as Ghana becomes a wealthier country, a country that generates more and more income, we should expect to see better services provided, whether it is better standards in education, whether it is a safer country, whether it is more efficiently run public servants, GRA, and so on, better quality healthcare. It is difficult to imagine that you could have better education, better quality healthcare, safer streets, without public servant salaries increasing to match international levels. But certainly you cannot be expecting better when you are decreasing public servant salaries. That to me is really shocking. And we therefore want to make sure that Guyanese kind of understand that it, there's a deliberate effort being made to ensure, or at least this is the side effect of what's going on, that Guyanese are going to continue to receive not as good services as really we would like them to see across a wide range of areas. There's studies that indicate that, as an example, when police receive increases that are below expectations, that they don't perform as well for a prolonged period of time, several months. Now, if that happens every single year, that would be, negative motivation that will discourage police from being able to perform at their very best. That's what the National Bureau of Economic Research had put out a study based on that. But you can similarly imagine across the public service such an effect where public servants are frustrated, where they're now considering migrating, leaving Guyana, because they're not being paid adequately. And when you've got a country that's growing, I think it's a 38% this year, 63% last year, and your pay on a real rate in terms of accounting for inflation, your pay is decreasing. That would, I think, frustrate anyone and demotivate anyone.
Yeah,
It is an artificial famine in a time of plenty.
yeah,
That
thank
is what is going on.
Yeah, Elson, let's do some basic things. Give our viewers a sense of what public servants make. Give us the lowest, what you call it, grade category. What public servants? I mean, I was speaking to a young lady recently, a couple of nights ago, who
Yeah,
called me to complain, and
yeah,
she is an immigration officer,
sure, sure.
and she's saying she takes home $79,000, and that
Yeah.
was a shock to me. So give us a sense of the pay grades.
No, absolutely. Well, you've got a public servant minimum wage, which is around the $80,000 mark, and then you've got teachers and so on who earn around about 100. Well, some low level police officers will earn around about 100 take home, and then teachers slightly around that area, a little bit more than that.
Yeah, a teacher told me 109, and this is a truth.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the range. And then, I mean, obviously, senior mistresses and then teachers will earn a little bit more, but you're still not talking about huge numbers. You're talking about 200,000 and something, and then of course you've got those at the upper end, the ministers and public procurement commissioners and whatnot who are earning 900,000 and
yeah. Well, I'm
huge
not
figures,
talking about
president
them because
in
they're
excess
really
of that.
not workers.
But
You know,
that means that the vast majority of the public service is not earning some super salary. The vast majority of the public service is really just getting by, and yeah, as economists, we tend to refer to those people as the working poor. They're just getting by. They're economically insecure because they barely have enough money to make ends meet. So that is sad to say what we're looking at with the public service. But we would remind viewers that, even now with these increases, with this current salary, under the PPP, the public servant minimum wage was for a prolonged period kept, I think it was
yes,
5,000 or something for a
right. The
long time.
coalition was able, the coalition raised it.
Exactly. We had to increase it, and we increased it immediately by a substantial amount. I think it was 26% that first year. And then over the course of only a few years, we had increased that, and as well as some other salaries. Those at the lowest end by 77% over just a few years, and that's before oil production. So what you've really got is that the PPP will artificially keep public servant salaries low, and then the coalition has to come in and make those adjustments. And the reason that is really tragic is, first of all, public servants are entitled to reasonable pay just like everyone else. But secondly, the PPP seems to want to put public servants in this box of being, and this is an argument you're hearing them say now, sustainability. They say that public servants are just an expense and that they're not integral to the development of the country. Now, that is such a wrong-headed argument that it really, it's really disturbing because, as an example, teachers and our education system is absolutely fundamental to the development of Guyana. As an example, having a safe, environment is absolutely essential to the development of Guyana. One of the things that we in the opposition have spoken about, with police officers in particular, is that people don't walk around at night going from bar to bar, which is what they do in many other cities around the world. And therefore, that stifles our tourism products. In fact, you'll often see bloggers who are travel bloggers and so on, who will say they didn't enjoy their stay in Guyana. They were told not to walk around at night. It's not safe. I've seen bloggers say that on more than one occasion. And that is extremely problematic because tourism is obviously an area that we would like to see a lot of growth. Now, that's two areas I've spoken about, security and education. But when it comes to healthcare, we also would like to see better quality healthcare, and it is integral to the development of Guyana. We need to ensure that people are not missing work because they're ill, that people's life expectancy is not shortened because of they've not been able to access healthcare. Now, and I don't know if you had noticed this, but there was an interesting back and forth between the president and what seemed to be a UK journalist. Whereas the president is saying, oh, you're taking our nurses, you're taking our doctors, and so on. But the irony of this thing, and this is something that I think we've discussed on this show before, is that this year, according to the IMF, at purchasing power parity, so that's if you look at comparable prices, Guyana has a higher per capita income than the United Kingdom. Higher than the United Kingdom. And so the irony of it is that the president is talking to this journalist and saying the UK is taking, but the president is in a position to pay Guyanese workers a wage that is competitive with the UK at purchasing power. He's in that position, and in fact, he could even pay wages that are a bit better if you're looking at purchasing power. Now, as we have indicated, the government budget has tripled. If public servant pay had tripled, you would certainly be past the UK at purchasing power. And what we're saying in the opposition is that not that they should triple it overnight, but at least a 50% salary increase is what is in order to help public servants across the board to start being in the process of being internationally competitive. Now, of course, some healthcare workers did receive an increase, but it is not enough of an increase, and therefore, we've continued we continue to have this question of nurses and doctors leaving. Now, the long and short of this is, first of all, public servants are integral to Guyana's development, Guyana's economy, and progress for our citizens. But second of all, it is ludicrous to suggest or to think about public servants as some expense that you cannot afford. When on the one hand, you can't afford it, and on the other hand, they are providing benefits to the society. But that's the way that the PPP is thinking about public servants, and so they are coming up with all sorts of absurd arguments and really burying their heads in the sand. And as a result, public servants are continuously frustrated.
And then, of course, the fact that they do not treat with the public servants unions, not with the teachers unions, not with the public service union. They treat them as pariahs and so forth. And when one takes into consideration that a lot of the vast majority of the public servants tend to support the opposition electorally, one cannot help but infer from that there is some political motive behind this. And of course, in a society like ours, political motives have ethnic consequences. And so therefore, the situation is not a cut and dry situation. Let me ask you, and I'm sure I asked you this question before. Given the rate of inflation, given the amount of money that we have and that the government is spending, what would be, at a very minimum, what would a livable wage for public servants look like at the very minimum? I'm talking about the minimum.
No, well, the key thing here is this. We have said that we don't believe that any Guyanese across the spectrum, whether private or public sector, should be carrying home less than $150,000 a month. And the reason that we say that is, first of all, that is not an obscene amount of money. But second of all, we don't want any Guyanese to be really living as the working poor. That's the first thing that we're saying. Now, when it comes to public servant salary increases, if your budget triples, you can certainly afford a 50% increase in public servant salaries. And you can afford additional increases. And that, of course, assumes that the budget stabilizes, but the expectation is that the budget will continue to grow. So, what has happened is that public servants have been left behind rather than keeping pace in any form with, as one would expect, the national budget. And so, sadly, their public servants are so far behind because their wages are deliberately being depressed that when in office, we will have to provide very large salary increases in order to help public servants to be internationally competitive. You can't have an economy with a per capita GDP higher than the United Kingdom at purchasing power parity, and which by next year will be in the top five, and the year after will be the highest per capita GDP at purchasing power in the entire world. And how public servants, they're struggling. That is manifestly absurd. And so it is not just a matter of a minimum level, but a matter of large increases, like a 50% increase, and then multiple other substantial increases to bring public servants to a reasonable level. Again, public servant salaries have been artificially depressed. Even this year, if you think about it, public servants' salaries, adjusting for inflation, have shrunk. So if the coalition wants to give public servants a raise, we have to account for the years like this year where public servants' salaries actually shrank. So it's quite a lot that needs to be done. So apart from the base $150,000, we will have to do quite a bit more than that. Recall that the inflation question is one where public servants are, especially those at the lower end, are feeling as they say in Ghana, the squeeze the most because those with lower income spend a greater proportion of their income on food. And food inflation, one writer mentioned the other day, is 14% according to the World Bank. Now, food inflation has, over the course of the entire post-pandemic period, been one of the highest components of inflation. And therefore, public servants have been disproportionately feeling the squeeze, especially those on the lower end of the income scale, compared to those at the high end of the income scale. So they've been disproportionately affected by these high prices. They are the ones suffering the most. And on this note, there's a very sad and really pernicious, very ugly part of this, which is that the PPP gives these across the board increases, which benefit those at the high end far more than those at the low end. And so a public servant at the low end of the spectrum will be making a mere $65,000, getting a mere $65,000 retroactive this year. Versus if you're at the top end, you're making a $900,000 or something like that, you're getting $700,000 at Christmas. Now, that is so unjust during a time of a high cost of living, when the inflation rate for food has been the highest, when people are complaining about the price at the market. For you to not take the time, because all it is a little bit of time, to sit down and work out how you can give those at the lower end a larger increase, give a smaller increase to those at the upper end who are in a better position, who may have assets, who may be benefiting in various ways and so on. Higher income people tend to have assets and therefore benefit even when there's inflation. Lower income people don't have assets, so they hardly benefit. Now, instead of taking the time to really assess the situation and try and deal with the needs of those who are in the dire straits, the PPP has just abandoned that and just given across the board 6.5%. Probably it was easier to calculate, or it helps their friends and elite more, but it is heartless. And so somebody at the higher end of the income scale is receiving more than 10 times as much as somebody on the lower end of the income scale. That is so ugly.
It's unconscionable and ugly, as you say. I'm sure you saw the lead story in Kaito News today about the remittances to Guyana, and I want to get your comments on that. What does that say about our fastest growing economy um, and does it how does it fit into um, the overall economic situation? I note that it represents what 3.8% of GDP. Comment on that, please.
No, absolutely. It is in many ways a reflection of the sentiment where you hear people say that they still would migrate from Guyana, fed up of Guyana, they would leave. And you're thinking to yourself, you're in the country which in 2 years is going to have the highest GDP per capita at purchasing power in the entire world. The country with more barrels of oil per person than every country except for Kuwait. More barrels of oil per person than Saudi Arabia. And there's this negative sentiment. It must be a result of poor governance. Now, the fact that remittances still are such a significant component of income in Guyana is again an indication that the average person is not benefiting and therefore is frustrated and therefore needs help from abroad. This is truly tragic. I think it is opportune to remind your viewers again that it is not merely that, oh, the growth is a lot, oh, the oil production is a lot, but it is also that the government has tripled the national budget. So money is being spent. So people are asking, where is this money going? Because if it's not going to the average Guyanese who is still having to ask for remittances or depend on their family abroad, now where is all this money going? How can you be spending 3 times as much as the coalition and people are still desperate? That is unbelievable. But it can only happen if your priorities are totally wrong headed, if the way that you govern the country is poor, and if you are not developing the economy in the way that it should be developed. So, sadly, this is what we're seeing. Now, another thing that they've done, which I think is again related to this issue, is they have not been publishing the Ghana Labor Force Survey, which will give you things like your unemployment number and so on. And that, to me, youth unemployment number, that is similarly pernicious. And we raised this concern with the IMF when we met them in Washington, D.C., because we're saying that we need to be provided regular data that we were typically provided on how wages are performing in the economy. Now, for them to have been suppressing that particular survey for so long, it's a couple of years now, that to me is also really a warning sign that they know to themselves that there have not been wage improvements and employment improvements as they really should be, given how much has been spent, and therefore people have to rely on contributions from those abroad. This couples well with reports that we've seen. I believe UNICEF came out with a report last year or the year before, indicating that Guyana had a poverty rate in excess of 40%. Now, for you to be producing oil at this rate, 600,000 barrels of oil, every time you look at the news abroad, they're saying Guyana is impacting the oil market. Guyana is impacting the oil market. 320 billion or so of Guyana dollars of revenue this year alone, and people to be desperately poor. This is really, really concerning, but it is a trend that is showing no sign of letting up at all on the PPP, no sign at all. And, that is why there is a need for change of policies, and that can only come with a change of government.
Wow, wow. Let's turn our attention to the war. Well, not the war, Venezuela's aggression towards Guyana, and we've been talking a lot about the politics of that aggression, and we've not been paying enough attention to the economics of that aggression. What are some of the economic implications of Venezuela's aggression towards Guyana?
Well, the most recent one that was indicated, I think yesterday or the day before, was that the price of insuring ships to transport oil, whether it is Guyana's or Exxon's share of oil, that price of insurance has gone up because Guyana is indicated to be a risk zone that's at risk of conflict. Now that means that essentially the take that Guyana gets, the amount of revenue that we're going to get from oil is a little bit diminished because of the price of insurance. The same would be the truth for the operator. Now that is concerning. But there are a lot of broader concerns here. One being, and you may recall this, that Maduro did say that all Guyanese firms have to leave Essequibo within 3 months. For any Guyanese who's doing business in the region, that puts at the back of your mind that within 3 months there will be some sort of a confrontation or an escalation. It may not also have escaped you that the Argyle Agreement indicates that within 3 months they're supposed to meet in Brazil. So, unless something changes, it would seem that one of the things that will be discussed in Brazil will be Guyanese firms being in Essequibo and operating. That is such a violation of Guyana's sovereignty that it really, really, I think, should annoy Guyanese. Any patriotic Guyanese, it should annoy them. Because how is it that we can have signed on to an agreement that really will put us in conversation on, or potentially, if Venezuela raises this issue, on something where we have every right to exploit our natural resources. We have every right to exploit our natural resources in Essequibo. And so Venezuela is saying all Guyanese firms must come out of Essequibo. Us not getting any kind of concession where they backed off of that language. And then this meeting in 3 months, which is the same time period they've given our companies to leave, really frames an environment which I think would concern a lot of investors, and which will be concerning as we head on into that meeting in Brazil. And so we've already got the broad strokes of a potential confrontation in Brazil or something concerning leading into the meeting in Brazil on the back of just Guyanese firms looking to do business in Essequibo. This really, we speak about the history of Guyana, and we speak about how close we are to Essequibo. Now, my forefathers were slaves in Essequibo, and have had businesses in Essequibo, have engaged in economic activity in Essequibo over the hundreds of years. I know that many other Guyanese, whether they're Armenians, their family have lived in Essequibo for generations beyond memory. Whether you're Indo-Guyanese and your family was indentured laborers in Essequibo, another form of economic activity, even though with very, very negative elements to it. Folks, for someone to come and say that for a Guyanese firm to do business in Guyana, they have a problem with it when they are an external power, and that we must come out of Essequibo, is beyond acceptable. We have suffered for so many generations in Essequibo, and we cannot let that suffering go on ears that won't listen. That's the first thing. The second thing is, now for long-term investors in Guyana, we want to ensure that we have an environment in which they can have every confidence in the stability of the region. And we want to ensure it is a region of peace. What's good about the Argyle Agreement is that we did get some language around not using force, which is good. But there are other questions that have arisen. Many commentators have made the same observances that I have made. And there are a wide range of tricky situations that we might have to deal with based on these agreements. This is distressing. And I think that the leading opposition has made these remarks. We could have been better prepared going into that meeting. We could have been much better prepared. And I think we're only now digesting the implications of some of the things agreed to.
Well, you raise a very, very important point there. The Argyle Declaration does not treat with the decrees that Maduro. The Argyle Declaration does not impose on Maduro to withdraw those decrees, and it's mind-boggling that our president would sign a document that is so much against Guyana's interest. I know people are being diplomatic because it's a time of national crisis and people don't want to be seen to be playing politics, and we should not play politics. And not playing politics means that we have to point out the truth. Um, from my standpoint and my political party, the Working People's Alliance, said in our statement, before we would have sat down with Maduro, we would have demanded that he withdraw the decree as a minimum condition for meeting. And I find it so disheartening that our president would affix his signature to a document that is so much against our vital interests. Yes, as you point out, that it buys us some time and space that Venezuela is not going to militarily be aggressive towards us. But there is nothing there about the economic aggression, as you are pointing out. And this thing is not just military, it's economic. It's about stifling our growth, economic growth and expansion in Essequibo. And the Argyle Declaration says nothing about that. And our president signed on to that. As a young person, I'm talking to you here now, not as a PNC man and so on. As a young Guyanese, talk to us about how you feel about our leader really signing a document with so many holes.
No, I completely get where you're coming from. One of the things that you'd have heard the leader of the opposition mention as well is that we need to have an agreed agenda in advance of these talks. And you heard Maduro say he's coming to talk about the border. You heard the president say no, he's not going to talk about the border. Now, that therefore means that the meeting got off on the wrong foot.
Yes.
Totally off on the wrong foot. And when you've got, again, a lack of preparation and a not agreed agenda, it is easy to understand that these sorts of things will slip by you. Now, one of the things that really had been mentioned is that this economic dynamic is one way they'll try and maneuver. And it seems to me that they've got one over on the administration, and that they've already kind of framed the conversation for the next talks, which is in Brazil. They've already framed that conversation, and we have really been able to frame it from our perspective. We just kind of went along with, I mean, you even see language in it like dispute, territory in dispute, where of course we in Guyana have always said there's no dispute. The Venezuelans are just challenging something which is settled. And if they want to challenge it, that's their business, but there's never been a dispute. And we've gone to the ICJ to deal with it. No, the ICJ may use dispute in its language, but that's the ICJ. We in Guyana, and in any document that we sign on to, we should not be using that kind of language.
Yeah.
So, keep going.
No. I mean, and I read that thing that, looking, the ICJ uses the word dispute. And I am not saying that they should not, but there's international relations, there is international law, and there's international politics. And part of this is politics. And politically, there is no dispute, even if the ICJ uses the term dispute as part of their canon and so on. It does not mean that we should sign on a declaration with the word dispute inside, because Venezuela is saying it's a dispute. And we are saying it's
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. I would say that to extend our logic about the need for there to be an agreed agenda. Now, it baffles me as a young person in Guyana that they would agree to another meeting without having agreed the agenda for the next meeting. It's baffling. It's baffling. And so as a result, we in the opposition are going to continue to have to say, what is the agenda? You need to publicize this agenda. We need to agree on this agenda, because, it could be that Maduro is going to come with something that is highly problematic at the next meeting. And we've already highlighted the call for Guyanese firms to remove themselves from Essequibo within 3 months. So this to me has some serious negative implications that some writers are just now chewing over. But my perspective, I tell you, for me personally, is that one of the most dangerous things for us was just agreeing to meet again. For me personally, I think we needed to have some conditions, some preconditions, or at least an agreed agenda before we agreed to meet again. The mere fact of agreeing to meet again is what is allowing Maduro to go to his people and say that the ICJ process is now irrelevant. There is a bilateral process in place. It's going to be settled. The controversy will be settled through regionally through regional mechanisms like CARICOM and CELAC, and that's the narrative that he's taking with him. And so, to me, just to extend our logic again, we should not have agreed to any further meeting without agreeing an agenda for that meeting.
Without agreeing on an agenda. Without carrying tales out to school, are you aware whether the government has briefed the opposition leader or the opposition on the meeting?
Well, I can't speak on the behalf of the opposition. You'd have to ask him in that respect. However, what I will say is that you'll hear from various members of the opposition. You've heard from some already as we go along, because this is going to be an ongoing discussion in the national space, and an ongoing question as we get to the next meeting and presumably the meeting after that. These are all, this issue is not going to die off because unfortunately they have allowed it to perpetuate itself.
Do you think
You know.
do you think the president should go to the National Assembly and report to the National Assembly on the outcome of the St. Vincent meeting and the plans? Do you think it at a minimum the president should speak to the legislators?
Well, and this to me leads in an interesting direction. You'll tell me if you find it interesting or not. But I also have a degree in political science with a focus on international relations. And one of the things that we discussed at length, or at least that came up in one class, is this question of engagement with congresses or parliaments after the fact when it comes to treaties and so on. And in the US, the president can't just sign off on a treaty. It has to be ratified by the legislative arm of government.
That's right.
And the most famous example of this being something that was controversial was, I believe, Woodrow Wilson doing a lot of work on the League of Nations, and the U.S. Congress not agreeing to go along with that. And of course, the League of Nations didn't last much longer. Now, I am in the position, my belief is that the legislative arm of government, which I previously called the weakest arm of government in Guyana, needs to be engaged in these sorts of matters as direct representatives in many cases, as representatives who are close to the people. They need to be engaged. I believe that they should be contemplated by the National Assembly. I believe that it should be debated or at least discussed in the National Assembly. And I've seen an indication that Maduro is bringing this to his legislative body. And therefore, I think we should do the same, just because from political science perspective, I think that is the way that this should be approached, at least after the fact. Now, it doesn't mean that we should be looking for the parliament to outright reject the Argyle Agreement, but rather to clarify Guyana's interpretation of the Argyle Agreement. That's something that has been mentioned. I believe that is probably the way to go, so that we can at least add some guardrails and I think put Maduro on alert, and that the next meeting must have an agreed agenda. It's not just going to be a shouting fest where you can come and yell, "Why haven't you moved your businesses from Essegubo?" There must be an agreed agenda. And I think contemplating this in the parliament, contemplating this is gives us a good opportunity to make those sorts of things clear.
Elson, given everything, given the rate of inflation, given the astronomical rise in prices, given what workers are earning, Um, what can we look forward to economically, from an economic standpoint, in the new year?
Well, the issue with oil producing countries, particularly where the revenues are concentrated in the government, is that a lot of what can change will be tied up in the hands of the government.
Mhm.
And so, while you may see increases in employment or increases in wages in specific areas, particularly the oil and gas industry and so on, maybe construction and so on, even though we're not getting the numbers from the government, you kind of can't look forward to too much outside of sectors like that and those related to those sectors. If the government is not willing to put resources to proper use. And so, listen, one of the things that has been mentioned is if we can't see a significant public servant salary increase now, when you've got hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue, when you've got 600,000, in excess of 600,000 barrels a day of production, when you've got a $900 billion budget, if you're not gonna see public servant salary increases now, you're not really gonna see them at any substantial degree going forward on the PPP. They've made their minds up that they're not interested in that. And one of the things that is so troubling about this is they seem to be making this argument that public servant salaries should only increase in co with the non-oil economy. But that sounds to me like another way of saying public servants aren't supposed to benefit from oil revenues when it
Revenue,
comes to
yeah.
their wages and salaries. So oil revenues are only supposed to go towards the cabal, PP cabal, and those friends, family, and favorites who are engaged in whatever construction, folks. And of course, not everybody engaged in construction is part of the cabal, but those who are part of the cabal. So friends, family, and favorites are supposed to get this oil money, but public servants are not supposed to get oil money. I mean, that is the most ridiculous framing. But that's the frame we're looking at. Now, the negatives of that economically are one, Guyana's economy will not be run as efficiently as it should be because the public service is being underinvested in, and public servants play a big part in good governance and helping us to run the economy effectively, even if it's something as simple as incentivizing policemen and teachers and healthcare workers. But two, and this is something that the PPP doesn't like to talk about at all, which is that public servants will spend their increases and therefore will put money into the local economy, which will drive production, which will drive employment, which will drive an increase in wages in the economy. Now, the PPP likes to use this inflation argument, oh, it will cause inflation. And we previously demonstrated that the two times there were large increases, there was no substantial inflation. If you look at the previous administration, 77% increase, inflation rate was very much stagnant. But the reason in particular that there shouldn't be too much anxiety around inflation is that Guyana's economy is a productive economy. We are gaining revenue from our oil industry. And so it is not that we're talking about printing money and just putting money in there where there's too few goods, too many dollars, where there's not really value, where we're just throwing dollars into the economy. It's where we're earning money and we're distributing it in ways that have other economic benefits. And so this to me indicates very much a wrong-headed understanding of Guyana's economy, understanding of how to use our revenues. But the last thing that I want to point out to your viewers on this note is that for the PPP to say that they believe that, or to draw an implication that public servant salary increases can only come from the non-oil economy, to me, is an indication that their ability to plan on the use of oil revenues is extremely limited. Because it sounds like they don't know how to plan for what a sustainable percentage of oil revenues to go towards recurring expenses like public servant salaries and so on. They don't know how to account for that. They don't know how to budget for that. They don't know how to project for that. And that says to me that they have no idea what they're doing when it comes to the planning of the Guyanese economy. Jadwa likes to say, oh, the opposition there's no way to run an economy, they don't know how to run an economy. But that framing that the PPP is coming with, I think is a very clear indication they have no idea how to use our revenues. So on the one hand, There's the malicious side of it, which is that they really don't intend to give public servants any kind of income. But on the other hand, you're getting the sense from them that they're not sure how to use our revenue sustainably. They're not sure how to approach the issue. They don't understand that we get passive income just from having money sitting down in our natural resources fund, in our sovereign wealth fund. We get millions of dollars of income from that, and we will get more as time goes on. They don't understand that you have to use a proportion, it may not be as high a proportion, but a proportion of your oil revenues can go towards public servants, bearing in mind that you're making huge revenues and the economy is growing, but also that there are economic benefits that come from public servants, efficiencies, as well as the benefits we've spoken about. So it seems like they have no clue. And, I'll tell you one funny thing is that when I heard them speak that way, I had a powerful sense of deja vu. Because when I first had come back to Guyana after leaving Goldman Sachs and Guyana found oil, and I explained to people that, it's time for us to gradually expand the national debt because the long-term future of the country is radically shifted,
Yeah.
and we need to adjust our consumption so that we're not spending in a big lump as the PPP is spending in a big lump. We need to gradually approach this and create a structured plan. You heard people telling me all sorts of things like, no, you can't increase the debt and you can't do this type of planning. And if there's a reason that I'm the economic advisor to lead the opposition, it's because I was willing to do the planning when a lot of people were not interested in planning to put their head in the sand. And it looks like we're facing the same thing here with the PPP, where they're not interested or scared to do the planning around how you deal with recurring expenses like funding the public service. And so their solution is just to not plan. And if not planning is your approach, well, it's no surprise that you're gonna fall behind people who are indeed planning. And so I got a sense of powerful deja vu. It was like we hadn't learned anything as a country. From 5, 6, 7 years ago. Which is tragic. And the other side of it is, I think it is a great compliment to the opposition that he recognized that he needed people who will do some planning for him.
Right.
And that's how we got where we are today.
Elson Low, advisor to the leader of the opposition. Thank you so much, my brother, for coming through. And if we don't talk before the new year, happy holidays. Take some time off with family, do the little that can be done for Christmas, because despite the bleak economic situation for working people, Christmas is traditional.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you very much again. We come on every time I come on here. Unfortunately, PPP is up to some fresh misadventure.
I know. I
But
know.
I'm happy to come on nonetheless and have a chat.
Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you. Young Elson Low there, like I said, is one of the bright lights in this dark hour as we struggle to keep afloat and to hold our country together. Some young people are coming through. And, when people like myself look at that, you feel good, because I got into this thing in short pants, 15, 16, already a political activist. And I hear people beat up a lot of young people today. And I desist from that, because when I am in Guyana, I talk a lot to young people. Young people across the board, and I know that they're tuned in. I know they're tuned in. We just are not tapping them. And they're not seeing enough people like themselves. But people like Elson, though, I think, have a very important role to play. And I want to thank you all for staying with. Tomorrow night, I think Lincoln Lewis is coming on tomorrow night for us to continue the conversation. I want to thank all of you who have made your donation to your Politics 101 Christmas, New Year's donation. I want to thank you all. I called some of the people early in the program, and I want to urge the rest of you, please make your contribution to keep our program alive, no matter how small. No matter how small, please make your donation. The handles are on the screen, the Cash App handle, the PayPal, the Zelle handle. angles and keep our programming alive. Again, thank you all, those of you who've contributed, and thank all of you for coming on to the program tonight, as you do every night. And tomorrow night, we're going to be here. I know it's Christmas week, pre-Christmas week. All the preparations have started, but we still have to keep the struggle alive. I'm going to see you all tomorrow night. And as I said, Lincoln Lewis is going to be here to keep our company. Thank you all so much.